What's going on, guys? Dare here with Fantasy Football Advice, coming at you with another fantasy football video. Today, it's Saturday, you know what time it is. It's time to get into the wide receiver starts and sits heading into Week 8. We've put a giant emphasis on making sure that you know exactly where you stand when it comes to making the playoffs, and all of the roster moves when it comes to waivers and trades, they could be completely meaningless if we're not making the correct starts and sits each and every week. So this video is obviously as important as each of the rest of them. And in this one, we'll be going matchup by matchup, letting you know overall how we do feel about the wide receivers in that game, the range in which we do have them ranked, so by the end of it, you should have a good understanding of which wide receiver we would start over the next. Before we do get into the video though, just a quick reminder that if you do enjoy these videos or if they help you, all we do ask in return for you to show your support is simply by hitting that like button. It helps us grow the channel, and for those of you who may not be subscribed at this moment, take today as an opportunity to do so. But with that being said, let's hop over to our stat of the day. Yesterday's stat of the day was among the top 10 tight ends in a half PPR scoring setting. 4 of them have at least 10 yards per target. Mark Andrews, Dawson Knox, Kyle Pitts, and who was the other tight end? The correct answer was actually Dallas Goedert. Congratulations to JRR-RRD, the first to get this right on YouTube, and as for Twitter, at PistolP022. Once again, congratulations to both of you, but as for today's stat of the day, Cooper Kupp currently leads all wide receivers in the area of targets per game, coming in with 11.6. There's actually 3 wide receivers tied for second place with 10.4 targets per game. Those receivers are Devontae Adams, DJ Moore, and your question is, which is that third receiver? Leave your answer in the comment section down below. We'll be happy to let you know who wins in tomorrow's video. Alright guys, now without further ado, let's hop right into it. We do have a lot of matchups to go over, and the first one's actually going to be the LA Rams versus the Houston Texans. This one does have a massive spread coming in with 16.5, and although Houston is playing at home, they are going to be the 16.5 point underdogs in this one. On the Houston side, of course, we do have Brandon Cooks, the only wide receiver we're considering starting on this one, and unfortunately, this is not going to be the ideal matchup for him, but regardless, that will not stop this team from heavily targeting him. He is by far the best receiver on this offense, so he is going to be peppered with targets, and for that we do have him ranked as a back-end wide receiver too. Just keep in mind that the range of outcomes for him are going to be a bit wide. We can't be surprised whatsoever if he does bust, and considering his opponent is the LA Rams pass defense, a very strong one, we cannot be surprised whatsoever if he does end up busting. On the other side of the ball for the LA Rams, we have 3 wide receivers that you could potentially be starting. That would be Cooper Kupp, of course, who we just mentioned in the stat of the day, also Robert Woods and Van Jefferson, who did have a touchdown last week. When it comes to Cooper Kupp, nothing much really needs to be said about him. We have him ranked as the highest receiver on the week. No real questions as to whether we're starting him or not, so we'll move right into Robert Woods, who's only had 1 game in PPR scoring that he's not posted double-digit fantasy points. For that, he should be looked at as a relatively safe receiver, although the way that he's gotten those double-digit points have sometimes come in the area of touchdowns. Other, it's just been his receptions and yardage. He should be looked at as a player with a high floor, but maybe not as high as we've seen in previous seasons. You can start him this week as more of a wide receiver 3. With them projected as 16.5 point favorites in this one, it's not necessarily a positive passing game script for this team in the later half of the game. And as for Van Jefferson, we do have him ranked as a flex this week, and although he could be looked at as more of a desperation flex, the LA Rams are consistently looking in his direction for deep shots throughout each game. All it takes for him is 1 deep shot to connect for him to pay off the start, so we do have him listed as a flex this week. Just keep in mind his floor is obviously going to be really low. Moving into the next matchup, we do have the Cleveland Browns versus the Pittsburgh Steelers. Cleveland is going to be at home in this one, and they are going to be 4.5 point home favorites. When it comes to which receivers we're potentially starting in this one on the Cleveland side, obviously that's Odell Beckham and Jarvis Landry. Jarvis Landry did make his debut since returning from injury last week and put up a modest total, but the most important thing to look at was that he did receive 8 targets. One thing a lot of people may not recognize is that 8 targets came while he only played on 54% of snaps, so heading into this week, presumably he will be more healthy, which could potentially increase his overall snaps he plays on, and if that does happen, he should have a relatively high floor in this game. Between him and Odell Beckham, we do have him ranked higher, but he is still only going to be a flex. And as for Odell Beckham Jr., even though we do have him listed as a flex player, he is ranked outside the top 50, and when it comes to a floor, it is going to be much lower than that of Jarvis Landry's. On the other side of the ball for the Pittsburgh Steelers, we basically have Deontay Johnson and Chase Claypool. Deontay Johnson, clearly he's a lock each and every week to start, and he should be looked at as a high floor player as well. And even though he does have a high ceiling, we typically see him performing near his floor. That should continue in this matchup. The Cleveland Browns pass defense defense, it's not a scary pass defense that we try to avoid by any means, but what happens is they do like to run the ball often, and when that happens, they do typically limit overall opportunities for the opposing offenses. If that happens, that is going to mean less opportunities overall for all the receivers in this game. So when it comes to Deontay Johnson's possibility of him hitting his ceiling, it's much less likely than him performing closer to his floor. That's obviously going to impact Chase Claypool as well, but with him already being a more boom-bust wide receiver, it's not going to really impact him over what we're already expecting from him. We have him ranked as a wide receiver 3 this week, so he's clearly a player that most of you out there are going to start, but if you value a safe floor in this one, you might want to look in a different direction. Moving into the next matchup, we have the Philadelphia Eagles on the road versus the Detroit Lions. This game has a spread of 3.5 points. The Detroit Lions, despite being at home, they are going to be underdogs, and the projected total in this one's 48.5 points. Now looking at the receivers for the home team, Detroit, we have Khalif Raymond and Amon-Ra St. Brown. Typically, Amon-Ra St. Brown was looked at as a high floor receiver, but with him last week posting a complete dud, zeros across the board despite playing in 60% of snaps, we do have to question exactly how high his floor really is. So despite him usually ranking ahead of Khalif Raymond, who is coming off of a strong performance, is going to be the receiver ranked higher between the two. They're both ranked as flexes, but Amon-Ra St. Brown should be looked at as more of a desperation flex. And as for the Philadelphia Eagles, the only two receivers we're considering starting are going to be Devonta Smith as well as Jalen Reagor. Now, Jalen Reagor did score a touchdown last week, put up nearly 10 fantasy points, but that was on the back of just 2 targets. Now, desperate owners can consider starting him this week, but obviously he's going to have an extremely low floor. This is a positive matchup though, so definitely someone to consider. As for Devonta Smith, he does have an amazing schedule for most games throughout the remainder of the year, and although he has been playing a bit hit or miss, if there was a defense for him to potentially hit on, this would definitely be the one. For that, we do have him ranked as a wide receiver 2, albeit a back-end one, but most teams out there that do own Devonta Smith should consider trying to fit him in your lineup. The next matchup we have is the Chicago Bears versus the San Francisco 49ers. This game has the lowest total of the week, coming in with 39.5 points. Chicago in this one entered the game as 4-point underdogs. Now, Allen Robinson, Darnell Mooney, neither one of them has really popped off in several weeks now, so you can only really trust them as a flex. And with this game having the lowest total of the week, under 40 points we're talking about, I would try to look in a different direction if you have stronger options, but both of them are going to be ranked very similarly in that flex range. On the other side of the ball for the San Francisco 49ers, obviously the only 2 wide receivers we're considering starting, Deebo Samuel, the bona fide wide receiver 1. He's been a stud all season. Nothing's going to change in this matchup versus the Chicago Bears, which is a defense that does have the illusion of a strong one. Their pass defense has been suspect all season long. A lot of receivers have completely popped off against them, so Deebo Samuel in this one is going to have a higher ceiling than most people think. With this being a poor passing defense, I know Brandon Ayuk, a player who has busted in nearly every game this season, he's somebody that you can consider. We do have him listed as more of a desperation flex, but as mentioned, since this is a plus matchup, maybe you look in his direction this week if you're an owner who's dealt with a lot of injuries, or if potentially the bye weeks are limiting your overall options. The next matchup we have is the Carolina Panthers on the road versus the Atlanta Falcons. This is going to be a divisional matchup with a projected total of 46.5 points. Starting on the Atlanta side, we know Calvin Ridley hasn't been living up to expectations, at least when it comes to what we expected from him in the pre-draft research process, but if you actually look at his production, he's been playing as a high floor receiver, in fact playing very similar to the receiver opposite of him in this matchup, DJ Moore. I do think that the Atlanta Falcons passing offense has been trending in the right direction, and this week we do have Calvin Ridley listed as a wide receiver 1, albeit he is going to be listed as more of a back-end wide receiver 1, but he should still be looked at as a high floor option. Just make sure to alter your expectations overall, because this isn't the same passing offense and he's not going to have the same production as he did a year ago. As for Russell Gage, this is a player who did return from injury after only playing in the first 2 games of the season, and in his first game back he definitely made a statement. While only playing on 63% of snaps, he saw 6 targets, catching 4 of them for 67 receiving yards, even scoring a touchdown as well, and it was a pretty good looking touchdown if I do say so myself. Now, heading into this week, he should continue to see heavy involvement. As for his overall snaps, I'm not necessarily sure that those are going to increase because he is going to be playing as more of a role player as opposed to a staple. At least that was the role that he was playing in prior to his injury. He, of course, could earn more snaps and earn a bigger role as the season goes on, but I don't think this one performance after returning from injury is enough to say that with certainty. Regardless, though, we do have him listed as a flex player, and if his snaps somehow do increase this week, he could have a pretty high ceiling and a relatively high floor as well to go along with it. On the other side of the ball, we have DJ Moore and Robbie Anderson, and so many of the players in this offense have been playing very inconsistently, even starting at the quarterback position with Sam Darnold, a player who started off the season extremely hot and has since tapered off. But at the same time, it's not like these receivers have been helping him all that much either. DJ Moore, Robbie Anderson, both players have struggled with drops in the past few games. There have been plenty of opportunities for each one of them to have much stronger performances than what we've seen on paper, but they just haven't happened. It's not as if any player can point the finger or play the blame game, because each one of them has been guilty of playing inconsistently in one form or another. Regardless, though, this is a very positive matchup for the wide receivers in this one, so DJ Moore is going to be listed as a wide receiver 1. A matchup against the Atlanta Falcons is one of the best ones he could ask for, but keep in mind he has posted underwhelming results in other plus matchups. As for Robbie Anderson, we have him listed as a flex, but you know what happens when it comes to Robbie Anderson. He could have double-digit targets and still underperform. So once again, in a positive matchup, we still can't rank him higher than how he's been performing all season. Moving into the next matchup, we have the Miami Dolphins on the road versus the Buffalo Bills. Buffalo Bills in this one are going to be 14-point favorites in a game that has a projected total of 49 points. When it comes to the receivers we're potentially starting, we have Stephon Diggs, Emmanuel Sanders, and Cole Beasley. Stephon Diggs, similarly to Calvin Ridley, has not lived up to his pre-draft expectations, but I think he is going to have a much stronger second half of the season, and it all begins in matchups like this. The Miami Dolphins, despite having the illusion of being a strong passing defense, they've actually allowed wide receivers to score pretty heavily against them, so Stephon Diggs in this one, he should have a relatively high floor, but an even higher ceiling. We have him ranked as a wide receiver 1 this week, and anybody who owns him should make sure he's in the starting lineup, regardless of how strong your wide receiver core is. As for Emmanuel Sanders, he's not necessarily looked at as a high floor player, nor should he be looked at as one in this matchup, because a lot of his production has came in the form of touchdowns. Touchdowns, of course, we know are fluky, but with Dawson Knox still out of the lineup, we cannot be surprised whatsoever if he does continue his trend of reaching pay dirt. We have him ranked as a wide receiver 3 this week, along with Cole Beasley, a player who really tapered off in the beginning portion of the season, but before their bye week in week 6, against the Tennessee Titans, he posted his best game of the season on the back of 9 targets, 7 receptions, 88 receiving yards to go along with a touchdown. His skill set in this one does actually match up very well against this opposing defense, so you'll notice that Cole Beasley is ranked higher than he typically is, but if you own one of any of these receivers, I would be doing my best to try to fit them in my starting lineup, even if it's just for the flex spot. On the other side of the ball for the Miami Dolphins, with Tua returning to the lineup and now playing under center, we have seen this offense perform much better. The stronger play at the quarterback position has had a trickle-down effect to players like Jalen Waddle, also the tight end Mike Gesicki, but it is unfortunate that a lot of the receivers in this offense have been injured. That's not changing this week. Really, we do have Jalen Waddle and Preston Williams as the only real healthy receivers, at least at this point, that we can guarantee. And Jalen Waddle, despite him performing as a wide receiver 2, in this matchup versus the Buffalo Bills, the strongest pass defense we have on the season, there's no way we can rank him much higher than a wide receiver 3. Waddle is an exceptional talent, though, and we do know regardless they are going to try to get him involved in any way possible, so if there was an opportunity for him to succeed against the odds, he's the type of player to make that happen. Keep in mind the only other wide receiver, Preston Williams, he's going to be a player we have listed as a sit in this one, so outside of Jalen Waddle and Mike Gesicki, we're really not starting anybody else from this offense. Moving into the next matchup, we have the Cincinnati Bengals versus the New York Jets. The New York Jets in this one are 11.5-point underdogs despite playing at home, a game that has a projected total of 42 points. And on the Jets side of the ball, we know Corey Davis is listed as doubtful and may not play. If you are somebody that does own Corey Davis, make sure you have a backup plan. But his loss is, of course, going to be a gain for Jamison Crowder, who we do have listed as a flex in this one. Now, one thing I do want to bring up is that the Cincinnati Bengals pass defense has actually been playing very positively as of late. So despite when people do look at Cincinnati on their upcoming schedule and don't really fear it, they are starting to become a defense that we do have to acknowledge as potentially limiting for our receivers playing against them. Regardless, the type of volume that does go in the direction of Jamison Crowder is going to be high percentage throws, short and intermediate routes, so that is going to help him have a high floor in this one. But anybody out there getting super excited that Corey Davis is out of the lineup and think that Jamison Crowder is a lock to be a smash play this week, I hope you keep in mind that there is still room for disappointment. The only other receiver we're potentially starting is going to be Elijah Moore, and the reason that we're potentially considering him is strictly based off the fact that Corey Davis is out. All of the risk factors I had mentioned for Jamison Crowder are going to hold true for Elijah Moore, a player that's a rookie. And when it comes to rookies, they're already inconsistent as is. For that, he should be looked at as nothing more than a desperation flex. But let's say, for instance, you did lose Corey Davis and are looking for a potential replacement. You could look in Elijah Moore's direction, a player who can oftentimes be found on the waivers. On the other side of the ball, we have Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, Tyler Boyd, and I think when it comes to these three players, we all know the situation with them because I've been setting your expectations on the Cincinnati Bengals pretty consistently in every game so far. Now, it's not lazy analysis. Those expectations have held true in nearly every matchup and will hold true continuing moving forward. Jamar Chase is obviously the wide receiver one in this offense. He has an extremely high ceiling. We've seen him go for over 200 yards. Multi-TD performances are not out of his realm as well. So in this one against a defense that is now listed as more of a neutral matchup, they're still extremely beatable. And with Chase being an exceptional talent, he's going to have an extremely high ceiling in this matchup. As for T. Higgins and Tyler Boyd, those are going to be wide receiver threes in this one. There is a pretty sizable gap in talent when it comes to T. Higgins and Tyler Boyd. And with Boyd being a player that does rely on heavy amount of targets in order to produce typically, any lack of volume is going to have a significant impact on his production. T. Higgins, on the other hand, he can make the most of his targets and typically does. For that, although both receivers should see a very similar amount of targets by the end of the game, T. Higgins definitely is the favorite to do the most with them. For that, both receivers are going to be listed as a wide receiver 3, but when it comes to T. Higgins, he's much closer to a wide receiver 2, whereas Tyler Boyd should be looked at as more of a flex. Moving into the next matchup, we have a divisional game that has a pretty sizable spread at 51 points. It's going to be the Tennessee Titans on the road versus the Indianapolis Colts. The Colts in this one are going to be 2.5-point favorites, but that was pretty surprising for me to see because I have seen the Tennessee Titans defeat much stronger teams. Either way, when it comes to the Colts side of the ball, this is a very plus matchup for the receivers, and Michael Pittman, considering the offense has run through him so far, at least the passing offense, he definitely is going to have a high floor in this one, and with the total being projected at over 50 points, I think we could potentially see his ceiling creep in, which isn't an often occurrence. Now, part of the reason I say that is because T.Y. Hilton is listed as questionable, and while he hasn't yet been ruled out, throughout the entire week, all he did was log one limited practice. So when it comes to our rankings this week, we don't even have him listed as playing. If he does play, that is going to impact exactly how we feel about Michael Pittman. I would lower his floor as well as his ceiling, potentially feeling much safer trusting him as a wide receiver 3, but with our current expectations being T.Y. Hilton ruled out, he's listed as a back-end wide receiver 2 in this one. That leaves Zach Pascal, the only other wide receiver for the Indianapolis Colts we're potentially considering, and when it comes to Pascal, we have him ranked in the desperation flex range, and that's largely on the back of T.Y. Hilton not being out, the projected total being over 50 points, and the Tennessee Titans pass defense being one of the worst in the league. Keep in mind that even with our expectations of T.Y. Hilton out, we still only have Zach Pascal ranked as a desperation flex, so don't think that you're getting a complete smash spot, because Zach Pascal has disappointed in plenty of plus matchups with T.Y. Hilton out of the lineup. So for those of you out there considering starting Zach Pascal, you would have to be in a pretty tight situation in order to have to trust him. On the other side of the ball for the Tennessee Titans, we have A.J. Brown and Julio Jones. Julio Jones has been a massive disappointment all season long, and despite returning from injury, we really haven't seen the production follow suit. We do have him listed as a flex this week, which is much higher than his production has been so far, but that's largely on the back of the high total in this game. But considering that the Tennessee Titans can score with many of their offensive weapons outside of Julio Jones, there is still plenty of room for disappointment. As for A.J. Brown, since returning from injury, we've seen him produce now in back-to-back matchups, one of them even being against the strong pass defense of Buffalo. And over the past 2 weeks, he's had a total of 18 targets, 15 receptions, 224 receiving yards to go along with a receiving touchdown. Now that output is completely massive, and even though the Indianapolis Colts aren't exactly a weak pass defense, if A.J. Brown is able to produce against the Buffalo Bills, the best pass defense in the entire league, especially against outside wide receivers, he should have no problem performing well against the Indianapolis Colts. For that, we do have him ranked as a wide receiver 1, and you guys should start him as such. Moving into the next matchup, though, we have the New England Patriots on the road against the LA Chargers. This is a game with a projected total of 48.5 points, and the LA Chargers in this one are going to be 4-point favorites at home. Now, when it comes to the New England Patriots pass defense, they aren't necessarily as strong as they were a season ago, but that doesn't mean they're a slouch either. But when it comes to the receivers on the LA side of the ball, both of them have been producing all season long, and although Keenan Allen has disappointed a bit, at least when it comes to hitting his ceiling, he definitely has shown off his floor. He's had 10 plus fantasy points in every game this season, meaning if you're looking for a player with a high floor, Keenan Allen's one of the best of them him at that area. One thing to keep in mind though is that 2 of his past 3 matchups he has put up exactly 10 points, so he has been a bit underwhelming and I can understand that, but against the New England Patriots, he's definitely the type of receiver and has the skill set to be able to have a much better performance, at least when we compare it to what he's been able to do across the past 4 weeks. We do have him ranked as a wide receiver 2 in this one. Just keep in mind he is ranked just inside the top 20, so more of a back-end wide receiver 2, but as mentioned, one with a higher floor. As for Mike Williams, the bye is definitely going to have done him well. He was dealing with a lot of injuries, but with his play so far this season being his highest of his career, I'm sure he's excited to be fit into the lineup. The connection we've seen with him and Herbert is just unmatched, even Keenan Allen suffering as a result, but I feel very strongly that the bye week has allowed him to at least recover from some of his injuries, meaning the production we should see on the field should be much more consistent with what we've been seeing all season, which I know has been a concern for many of us Mike Williams owners when we were getting all the news of him suffering from injuries. We know he's an injury-prone player who could be lost for the season at any given moment, so the bye week couldn't have come at a better time, and if you own him, we have him listed as a wide receiver 1. As for the Patriots, the only real receiver that I would try to trust on this team is going to be Jacoby Myers, but you'll notice on the graphic we have both Nelson Agholor and Kendrick Bourne listed as desperation flexes. Kendrick Bourne, when it comes to production, has been the player producing, but when it comes to overall talent and which player of the two is playing on the higher upside types of plays and running the higher upside routes, those are both going to be in favor of Nelson Agholor, and while the results haven't necessarily shown themselves on the field, he's been a hair away from having much better fantasy performances, having many plays called back from just stepping out of bounds, being slightly there, and even penalties also calling back some of his better plays. So once again, we do have to rank Nelson Agholor ahead of Kendrick Bourne, but both players are desperation flexes at best. Moving into the next matchup, we have the Jacksonville Jaguars on the road versus the Seattle Seahawks. This game does have a modest total of 44.5 points. Seattle in this one is going to be 4-point home favorites. As we know, Geno Smith is continuing to be the starter, which is overall going to limit the upside for both receivers in this offense, but so far from what we've seen from Geno Smith, that has more impacted Tyler Lockett than it has DK Metcalf. DK Metcalf in the past 2 weeks with Geno Smith starting has still put up starter level production in both contests, and although we can't rank him like we did with Russell Wilson under helm, I don't think we can use Geno Smith starting as an excuse to sit DK Metcalf, and we do have him ranked this week as a wide receiver 2. Currently he's ranked as the wide receiver 18, which would make him a mid-grade wide receiver 2, and as for Tyler Lockett, I can understand if you guys that own him want to sit him. We still do have him ranked as a wide receiver 3, which would be starters for many rosters out there, but if you're trying to eliminate risk and you value your floor, for those of you out there in a matchup this week where you're projected to have a close result, meaning both you and your opponent are projected a similar amount of fantasy points this week, then maybe Tyler Lockett could be a player that you try to sit in favor of a player with a higher floor, somebody maybe like Jacoby Myers. As for the Jacksonville Jaguars, we do have 3 wide receivers potentially in contention of starting. Marvin Jones, obviously the favorite of the 3, but we also have Laviska Shenault and a player that I haven't mentioned leading up to this point, Jamal Agnew. Now when it comes to Marvin Jones, not much really needs to be said about him. He's the clear leading receiver on this team and likely going to be for the remainder of the season. We've given Laviska Shenault plenty of opportunities to increase his role in this offense, but unfortunately we have not seen that come to fruition, and in fact, even with the injuries to both Travis Etienne and DJ Chark potentially opening up more opportunities for a player like Laviska, we haven't really seen that happen, and in fact, Jamal Agnew is a player that's been now receiving the short and intermediate type throws, receiving much of the volume that we would have projected initially to go to a player like Laviska Shenault, so unfortunately for him, we do only have him listed as a flex play. In the aforementioned Jamal Agnew, he's also a flex play as well, but ranked quite a bit lower, somebody more in that desperation flex area. Moving into the next matchup, we have the Washington football team on the road against the Denver Broncos. This game does have a modest total of 44.5 points, with the Denver Broncos being 3.5-point home favorites. Now, the big news in this one is, of course, the status of Jerry Jeudy. And unfortunately, up to this point, we don't have any news on him potentially returning this week. He is, of course, eligible to return, but has not done so already. There is a chance that he is activated off of IR and potentially thrust into the lineup this week. But as it stands today, since we have nothing indicating that is going to happen, we do have to move forward with the expectations that he is going to be out this week. And Washington football team has been a much worse passing defense than we had expected initially, so starting the receivers against them is definitely what you want to do. So we have Courtland Sutton been ranked just inside the top 24. He's going to be ranked as a back-end wide receiver too, and that's the type of production he's been producing for our teams, while Jerry Jeudy has been out of the lineup. As for Tim Patrick, unfortunately, this may be the last game that we can trust him in our lineups before potentially dropping him to the waivers. He's been a high floor option, but did disappoint in the last matchup, and for that, I could understand how some of you would be a bit apprehensive in potentially trusting him this week, but me personally, I would side in the favor of Tim Patrick. We have a much larger sample of him performing and producing, and for that, we do have him listed as a flex starter this week, but I can understand if you guys do want to avoid him. As for the Washington football team, there's really only one wide receiver we're potentially starting. That's going to be Terry McLaurin, and I know the graphic does have him listed as a wide receiver 1, but in fact, he is going to be a wide receiver 2 in this one, albeit a high-end one. We do have him ranked inside the top 15, but there is a clear distinction between a player you trust as a wide receiver 1 and a player you trust as a wide receiver 2, and in this matchup against the Denver Broncos, a strong defense on all fronts, I think it's much better if we set our expectations appropriately, which would be Terry McLaurin trusted as a wide receiver 2. Moving into the next matchup, we have the Tampa Bay Buccaneers on the road against the New Orleans Saints. This game does have a pretty high total, coming in with 50.5 points. New Orleans Saints in this one are going to be 4.5 point underdogs at home, and one thing I did want to mention is that Marquez Callaway, yes, he's been playing very good, but the Tampa Bay Buccaneers pass defense has also been performing much better as of late. I don't think they're as susceptible as they were in previous games. If they continue to play as well as they have been, then starting your wide receivers against them is not going to be an easy decision. For that, we do have Marquez Callaway listed as a flex, but he is going to have a much wider range of outcomes than we typically would expect from him, but he's already a player who's a bit boom or bust to begin with. Now, the other big news is that Tre'Quan Smith is potentially returning to the lineup this week, and if he does, everything that I did say about the Tampa Bay Buccaneers pass defense will hold true for Tre'Quan Smith as well. And considering it would be his first game back from injury, I definitely would recommend you sit him even if he does return. On the other side of the ball for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, the big news is that of course we do have Antonio Brown still injured with an ankle injury, potentially expected to hold him out for several weeks. While he's out of the lineup, that is going to increase the floor and the ceiling of players like Godwin and Evans. Godwin clearly the favorite of the two, but when it comes to ceiling, Mike Evans' upside is unmatched. So this week we do have Chris Godwin ranked inside the top 10. Mike Evans, although we do have him ranked as a wide receiver 2, he's still inside the top 15, so a player that definitely is much closer to a wide receiver 1. The next matchup we have is the Minnesota Vikings versus the Dallas Cowboys. Minnesota in this one is going to be 3-point home favorites with a projected total that is 51.5 points. That is going to be one of the higher totals of the week. So when it comes to the receivers on the Minnesota side, we're basically suggesting starting all of them. Now that isn't all that surprising to hear because Justin Jefferson and Adam Thielen are auto starts each and every week. But when it comes to KJ Osborne, a player we don't typically recommend starting, this could be one of the weeks that you try to get him in the lineup. Now we do have him listed in the range of more of a desperation flex, so start at your own risk, but considering that the offenses should be firing on all cylinder on both sides of the football, this is the ideal matchup for you to potentially start a player like him. Now when it comes to Justin Jefferson, he's obviously a wide receiver 1. Adam Thielen, a wide receiver 2, and although he is a player that definitely relies on touchdowns more than most receivers out there, with a game with a projected total of 51.5 points, this is the ideal matchup for him to potentially have success. On the other side of the ball, for the Dallas Cowboys, nothing surprising here. We have CeeDee Lamb and Amari Cooper. CeeDee Lamb, of course, the wide receiver 1, Amari Cooper, the wide receiver 2. I think both receivers have a very safe floor, but when it comes to comparing both wide receivers, we have seen CeeDee Lamb start to separate himself, but that does not mean Amari Cooper is not a great start as well. Start both players with confidence this week. CeeDee Lamb as your wide receiver 1, Amari Cooper as your wide receiver 2. You're unlikely to be disappointed by starting either. Now moving into the final matchup, we have the Kansas City Chiefs versus the New York Giants. I know the big question on everybody's mind is the status of Patrick Mahomes, and believe it or not, he's not even on the injury report, so we have to move forward with the expectation that he is going to be fully healthy heading into this matchup. Now the only two wide receivers we're potentially starting on the Kansas City side are going to be Tyreek Hill, Mecole Hardman. Tyreek Hill, the bona fide wide receiver 1. Nothing more really needs to be said about him, but when it comes to Mecole Hardman, his usage and involvement has not been as high as we expected heading into the draft, and although we've seen it reach highs of double-digit targets, since his usage reaching a peak, we really haven't seen him reach that type of total since. For that, we do have him listed as a flex, and he's definitely going to be a low-floor flex as well, but if you're desperate or in a tight spot, you could do worse than starting Mecole Hardman. On the other side of the ball, we have the New York Giants, and we're obviously doing what we have been doing all season, which I'll call the New York Giants shuffle, which means we never know exactly which wide receiver is going to leave the lineup or enter the lineup in every given week. What we do know right now is that Sterling Shepard is expected to play, and he obviously is going to have the most upside of all New York Giants receivers, so we have him ranked as a wide receiver too. But as for Darius Slayton, a player who did enter the lineup last week and produced, we do have him listed as a flex, and the only other wide receiver you're potentially starting is going to be Dante Pettis. And although Pettis himself did have a very successful fantasy day, we're not in the business of chasing fantasy points because it could come back to bite us. But guys, that's going to do it for this video. We really hoped you enjoyed. If you did, how about hitting that like button? If you're new to the channel, please hit that subscribe button. Thank you all for watching. We'll catch you on the next one.